Wyoming Territory, July 1883. The wind came dry over the Redgrass Hills, and the woman walking alone down the wagon trail looked like she had already lost too much to care what came next. Elira Rowe had been walking since dawn, dust on her hem, her arms tight around the bundle holding her last two dresses, a skillet and a folded quilt. Her face was drawn, mouth set, and she looked up only to check the long road ahead. The sun was fierce, but she did not flinch from it. She had no place to go, but she had come too far to turn back. She had not cried when Earl drove off in their wagon 2 weeks ago, leaving her and her children asleep under the cottonwood trees near Cheyenne. She had not cried when the days passed and the food ran thin. She had not cried when little Josie asked in her soft way, "Mama, where's Pa?" And she had to lie. But when Josie got sick and Jamie could not stop coughing, Elira had left them with a widow in town who promised to keep them fed a few days more. "I just need a roof," she had said when the woman asked if she was looking for work. "I do not want love, just a roof." She had said it again this morning to a passing peddler who offered her a ride. "I don't want anything from a man but a roof over our heads." Nothing more. But the peddler had not known anyone hiring, so Elira kept walking. The trail curved toward a split-rail fence, and beyond it stood a modest homestead. A barn, a corral, a well. Smoke curled from the chimney. There was a man working the fence line, tall, broad-shouldered, shirt off against the heat as he hammered in a loose post. His horse stood nearby under the shade of a cottonwood, reins looped around the branch. She stopped at the gate. "Sir," he looked up and lifted one hand to his brow. His face was sun-brown, jaw square, eyes the color of the river before a storm. He did not speak right away, just looked at her, the dirt on her dress, the tightness in her mouth, the way her hands clutched the bundle like it was all she had left. Then he nodded once and set down the hammer. "You all right, miss?" "I need work," she said, voice low. "I can cook, clean, so tend a garden. I do not want love, just a roof." He came closer, slow and calm. "You got a name, Elira Rowe?" He studied her face. "Wesley Ryman." She gave a slight nod. "You got anyone with you, my children? They're in town. I left them with someone kind, but she swallowed. I need to bring them something better." Wesley looked at her a long moment, then opened the gate. "You better come in. You can sit in the shade, have water, and tell me what you're good at." She hesitated. "I do not want, I heard you," he said gently. "Just a roof." She stepped inside. The house was plain but solid. Oak floors, clean windows, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air. He poured her a tin cup of well water and handed it across the table. She drank it slow, her hands shaking only a little. "I built this place myself," Wesley said, sitting across from her. "Been running it alone since my brother passed last year. Could use help in the kitchen, in the garden." "You pay your way, you are welcome to stay." Her breath shuddered out. "Thank you," he nodded. "You want to bring your children here, you do that next. No sense working while they're elsewhere. I will go back tomorrow." "You can take my horse," he said. "He's steady." She blinked. "You would trust me with him." "You got that look in your eye," Wesley said. "The kind that says you have nothing left to steal." She looked down at her cup. That night she stayed in the small room off the kitchen. The bed was soft, the walls quiet. She lay awake a long time, staring at the ceiling, fingers curled tight around the edge of the quilt. She did not pray, but she hoped. The next morning Wesley saddled his bay gelding and handed her the reins. "You bring them home," he said. She rode hard into town. Jamie and Josie ran to her when they saw her, arms flung tight around her legs, voices high with relief. The widow helped her pack their few things, gave her a loaf of bread and a hug. When she rode back into Wesley's yard, Josie asleep in front of her and Jamie clinging to her back, he was waiting at the gate. "Welcome home," he said. Alira dismounted carefully, lifting Josie into her arms. Jamie slid down and looked up at the man with wide eyes. "This is Mr. Ryman," Alira said. "He is letting us stay." Wesley crouched to Jamie's height. "You like horses?" Jamie nodded hard. "You help me feed them and I will teach you to ride." Jamie's eyes lit up. "Really, really." That night they ate together at the table. Alira watched Wesley help Jamie cut his meat, watched Josie curl up in the man's big armchair by the fire. Wesley did not talk much, but he listened. And when he did speak, it was kind. Later, when the children were asleep in the room beside hers, Alira stood on the porch and looked out over the moonlit field. Wesley came out quietly, leaned against the post beside her. "You did not have to take us in," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I wanted to." She turned her head. "Why?" He looked at her then, real slow. "Because you walked down my road like you had nothing left, but you still stood straight. Because you asked for work, not pity. Because your children look at you like you hung the stars." She swallowed hard. "I told you I do not want love." "I know," he said, "but I am not asking for anything, just letting you rest." He reached out and gently covered her hand where it gripped the railing. She did not pull away. For the first time in weeks, something inside her eased. She did not want love. But the way the cowboy stood beside her, quiet, steady, warm, she felt like maybe she had found more than just a roof. The morning came cool and pale, dew clinging to the porch rail and the grass low against the fence posts. Alira rose before the children, folding her blanket without sound. She moved through the house softly, her bare feet careful on the wood. In the kitchen, she tied her hair back with a scrap of ribbon and started the fire with practiced hands. Wesley's boots approached from the barn. He paused at the door, watching her stir cornmeal into the pot. She nodded once without turning. "I found salt pork in the pantry," she said, "and beans enough for tonight." "That's fine," he said. "There's a smokehouse out back if you need more. Just don't go in if you hear bees." They settled under the eaves last spring. She glanced back over her shoulder. "I'm not afraid of bees." "You might be if you saw the size of them." His face was unreadable, but she caught the faintest twitch in his brow and didn't press. She ladled the corn mush into bowls and set them on the table. "I'll take the children into town after breakfast," she said. "Need to fetch the rest of their clothes." "You won't need to ride," he said. "I'm heading in for nails and kerosene. You can come with the wagon." She hesitated. "You sure?" he nodded. "I trust you not to disappear with my team." "I wasn't sure you trusted me to cook supper." "That's easier to fix than a horse gone missing." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased. Jamie and Josie came padding out together, still drowsy. They slid into their chairs without fuss, and Alira passed them each a bowl. Wesley ate in silence, his hands steady, his eyes never straying long from the children. Later, she sat on the wagon seat beside him, Josie wrapped in her shawl and Jamie riding on a crate behind. The trail into town was rutted, the wheels catching in places, but Wesley drove unbothered. He didn't speak unless something needed saying. Alira found she didn't mind. "I used to live east of the river," she said after a while, "before the war. My father kept sheep." Wesley nodded once but didn't interrupt. "He died before I married. Consumption. My mother passed not long after. I married too young, but I thought—" Her voice trailed off. "I thought a man who talked sweet would stay sweet." He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. "You ever been married?" she asked. "No, why not?" He let the reins hang loose in his hands for a moment. "I was supposed to come back from Kansas with a wife. My brother said I'd find better prospects there." "Did you?" "No. I found a girl who wanted a man with more money than land, and another who thought a homestead meant servants, and one who asked too many questions about my scars." She looked at him then. "You have scars," he shrugged. From when I was 17 and mean with something to prove." She didn't press further. In town, Jamie helped carry the bundled clothes, his arms full of small shoes and linens. Josie clung to Alira's skirt, shy in the bustle. Wesley waited with the wagon, leaning against the wheel while she spoke to the widow one last time. When they returned, he loaded the bundles without a word and helped Josie up by the elbows, gentle and sure. The ride home passed quiet again, the sun lowering behind them. At the house, Alira carried Josie inside, and Wesley lifted Jamie down with one arm. That evening she washed the children while the stew simmered. She scrubbed behind their ears and combed out their hair, humming low. Through the window, she saw Wesley splitting kindling near the shed, the axe rising and falling at a measured pace. When the sun dipped low, they ate by lantern light. Jamie's head bobbed, sleep creeping over him, and Josie curled up in Wesley's chair again without asking. Alira tucked them in early, smoothing down the quilt and brushing their foreheads with her lips. She stepped onto the porch afterward, not expecting company. But Wesley was already out there, sharpening a blade with slow, even strokes. He looked up once, then kept working. "You didn't ask," she said, standing near the post. "Didn't need to. But you wanted to." He set the whetstone aside. "I figured you'd say when you were ready." She folded her arms. "I don't know if I'll ever be, that's fair." A soft wind stirred the dust at their feet. A locust chirped nearby. "I didn't think I'd feel safe again," she said, staring out at the dark fields. "Not in a man's house, not with my children under another roof." "You are," he said. "Because you're kind. Because I don't want anything from you that you're not ready to give." She turned toward him then, her face in shadow. "And if I never do, then you'll still have a roof, and work, and a place for your children." She watched him for a long time. "I said I didn't want love. I know. But you're holding this space like you're waiting for it anyway." He didn't move, didn't reach for her. Just looked at her quiet with that same steadiness he showed the horses. "I hold it," he said, "because I know what it's worth when it's real." She stepped down the porch stair, just one step closer to him. "You're not what I expected. You think I'm soft." "No," she said. "I think you've been hurt too. But you didn't let it make you cruel." He looked away toward the barn, then back at her. "That wasn't easy," she nodded. "Neither is trusting someone again." He didn't speak. He just stood there, still as the land around them, and waited. She didn't take his hand, not yet. But she didn't go back inside either. She stayed, standing a little nearer than before, the night stretching wide and quiet around them. The first frost came early that year, brushing the grass with silver and making the pump handle bite when Alira gripped it before sunrise. She wrapped Jamie's feet in wool scraps before he went out to help Wesley with the horses, and Josie nestled under the patched quilt by the stove, her nose red and her hair tangled from sleep. Alira kept herself busy. She patched shirts, boiled apple skins with cloves for scent, and hung damp laundry near the fire. The house warmed slowly, but not as slowly as she did. Each day brought something quiet and steady, a split loaf wrapped in a cloth, fence repairs done without her asking, fresh eggs left on the sill when the hens finally laid again. Wesley didn't hover. He worked from first light to dusk, but his presence was felt in the way the barn door stayed latched against the wind, in the way Jamie started to walk with his shoulders back. He never asked after the children's father. He never asked for more than she offered. One evening, after the sun had gone behind the hills, Alira brought out a length of muslin and began stitching by lamplight. Wesley was drying his hands on a rag after hauling water in. "You sewing something new?" he asked, nodding toward her lap. "A dress. Josie's outgrown the last one. I had to let the seams out twice already. Want me to cut more firewood while there's light enough?" I stacked some earlier, from the pile behind the coop. He leaned against the table, arms crossed. You're fast becoming more useful than I am. I doubt that, she said, not quite smiling. He looked toward the children's room, where Josie's soft breathing could be heard through the door. Jamie asked if he could sleep in the loft one night, said he wants to know what it's like to wake up with the barn swallows. He's never spent a night without me, she said. He wouldn't be far. She set her needle down, fingers resting lightly on the cloth. He wouldn't ask if he didn't feel safe. No, Wesley said. He wouldn't. She didn't speak again until the lamp burned low. Then she stood, brushing thread from her skirt, and walked past him to the kitchen. He followed with the lantern to light her way. At the sink, she rinsed her hands. I found something behind the flour tin this morning, a tin of blackstrap and a tin of peaches. I'd forgotten about those. You were saving them. Maybe. She turned to face him, lamplight soft on her cheeks. We could make a cake. His brow lifted slightly. You think we need a reason? She didn't answer right away. Then, Josie turns 5 in 3 weeks. I'll ask around for sugar in town. I can stretch the flour if we grind oats. I'll fix the oven door. It's been sticking. They stood in the quiet, something pulling taut between them, not rushed, not fragile, just there. Present like hunger, like sleep, like the steadiness of breath. Wesley shifted his weight. You ever miss the mountains? She blinked. What makes you think I knew the mountains? The way you watch the hills at dusk, like you're expecting them to rise taller. She considered that. We lived near the Laramie Range when I was a girl. I used to pretend the wind there could lift me, carry me off. Does it still feel like that? No, she said. Now it feels like it just wants to take what's already loose. He looked down at the floorboards, then back at her. You're not loose, Elira. She didn't move. I was once. Not anymore. She studied his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his jaw settled when he was listening. Not the kind of man who filled silences with assurances, just a man who stayed. You ever think about what you'd be if the war hadn't come? She asked. Maybe a carpenter. I like the feel of good wood in hand even before I knew what to do with it. You build well, she said. I try. Her voice was quieter now. You're building more than a house. He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer, just held her gaze. I know, he said. She stepped past him, brushing his arm lightly. It wasn't a gesture meant to linger, but it did. He caught her wrist gently, his hand rough but careful. Elira. She turned, the firelight flickering in her eyes. You still don't want love? She didn't answer right away. Then softly, I still don't know if I deserve it. He let go of her wrist, but his voice stayed warm. That's not the same as not wanting it. She stood there a moment longer before stepping back. Good night, Wesley. Good night. He watched her go, the door clicking softly shut behind her. Outside, the wind stirred the dry grass, and a coyote called out somewhere beyond the ridge. Wesley stayed by the table, the scent of apples and ash in the air, and thought about the way her voice had caught when she said his name. Like it meant something now. Like it might one day mean more. The wind changed the week before Josie's birthday. It came down from the north, colder than it had any right to be, and brought with it a sky the color of pewter. Elira watched it from the edge of the porch while Jamie practiced throwing rope rings at a fence post, and Josie pressed her face to the parlor window, humming tunelessly to herself. Wesley was gone longer than usual that morning, and when he returned, he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands and his coat dusted with sleet. Snow touched the ridge, he said. Won't be long. Elira wiped her hands on her apron. We've got carrots and onions cellared. I'll start canning the rest. He stepped aside to let her pass. You'll need help lifting jars. I'll manage, she said, then paused. Though if you've got time to boil seals, I wouldn't refuse it. He nodded and set his hat down near the stove. I brought something from town. She looked at him warily. What? He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small bundle wrapped in rough linen. She took it with both hands and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a cake tin, round and dented with a lid that fit snug. "For her birthday," he said. "Figured it might hold up better than the skillet." Elira ran a thumb along the edge. "It's clean. Boiled it twice," he said. "Mrs. Rourke at the store claimed it hadn't been used since her daughter left for Illinois." Elira folded the linen and set it aside. "Thank you." He hesitated, then said, "You never told me what kind of cake she likes. She's only had bread sweetened with honey, but she talks about peaches like they're spun sugar." He nodded. "Then peaches it is." She turned back to the pantry, her voice low but steady. "You didn't have to do this. I know." That night, she sat beside the fire with her sewing while Wesley read from a book of farming almanacs. Jamie dozed in a pile of quilts, and Josie had fallen asleep with her hair wrapped in a rag to keep it from tangling. The room smelled of ash and cloves, with the faintest trace of tallow from the candle stubs they were burning down to the end. Elira spoke without looking up. "You plan to stay here your whole life?" Wesley glanced over the top of the page. "I built this house with both hands. Took me 3 years to finish it proper." "That's not what I asked." He closed the book. "I'd thought about moving south once, before the war came back around and took my brother." "Do you ever wish you had?" "Sometimes," he said. "But there's nothing down there I'd trade for what I've got here now." She didn't answer, just folded the hem on the cloth and tied off the thread. "I've been wondering," he said, "what you used to dream about before you had to start surviving." She didn't look up. "Does it matter?" "Only if you still remember." Her needle paused. "I wanted to teach. Thought maybe I'd run a schoolhouse. Had a book of spelling charts once, and a slates and chalk set my father bartered off a traveling preacher." "What happened?" "I married." He waited, quiet, the fire popping softly between them. "I thought it would be different," she said finally. "I thought someone choosing you meant you were safe. I won't ask what he did. I wouldn't tell you if you did." He nodded once, then looked down at the book again but didn't reopen it. "I still have that spelling chart," she said suddenly. "It's folded in the lining of my bag." He turned his head. "You ever think about teaching again?" "I don't know. The thought of putting my name to anything still feels like a gamble." Wesley stood and stoked the fire, adding a split log with practiced hands. "You're allowed to want something more." She looked up at him, her eyes unreadable. "Even after all I've lost, especially after." He didn't press further, didn't ask what else she carried. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching the flames catch. The next morning, Elira pulled on her boots before dawn and stepped outside to gather the last of the apples from the trees out back. The frost clung thick to the leaves, and when she reached for a branch, her fingers stung with the cold. Wesley was already in the barn, feeding the mare. He glanced up when she passed, but didn't speak. She didn't expect him to. By now, the silence between them had taken on a shape of its own, not cold, not distant, just something steady enough to rest against. When she returned to the kitchen, her apron full of fruit, Josie was awake and sitting at the table, legs swinging. Elira washed the apples, peeled them with sure hands, and set them on the stove to soften. Wesley came in just as the scent began to rise. Jamie followed him, face flushed from the cold, and whispered something to Josie that made her eyes light up. Elira didn't ask what. She just handed them both a biscuit and sent them outside with it. Wesley leaned against the doorframe. "They're different now." "They're not afraid," she said simply. He nodded. "Neither are you," she didn't reply. Just kept slicing. Later that afternoon, while the children napped, Elira stepped into the barn. Wesley was trimming a plank for the chicken coop, sawdust thick in the air. "They sleep sounder now," she said. "I noticed." She hesitated, then walked closer. "Did you mean it? That I'm allowed to want something more?" He set down the saw and looked at her. "You wouldn't have asked if you didn't already." "I want to teach," she said. "Even if it's just Josie and Jamie and the neighbor's girl from up the ridge." He wiped his hands on a cloth. "Then I'll build you a space to do it." She blinked. "You don't need to, I know," he said. "But I want to." She stepped closer then, slowly, her boots crunching on the straw. She reached out and touched his shirt sleeve just above the elbow. He didn't move. "I think I might be ready," she said softly. "For what?" Her voice didn't waver. "To be held like I'm everything." Wesley looked down at her hand, then back up at her. "You sure?" She nodded once. He reached for her then, arms strong and certain, and pulled her close like it had been a long time coming. He held her with a care that said he didn't take any part of her lightly. Not her worry, not her hope, not the weight she carried. And she let herself rest there, just for a moment, in the warmth of a man who'd never asked her to be anything but exactly who she was. The morning of Josie's birthday came with a sky the color of river stone, and the smell of snow still far off but promised. Elira was up before the children, mixing flour and blackstrap in the new tin, her sleeves rolled and her hair pinned back. She worked quietly, her movements practiced but lighter than usual. There was music in the quiet and undercurrent of something slow and steady that hadn't been there before. Wesley stepped in from the barn, arms dusted with hay, and hung his coat by the stove. He stood for a moment, watching her spoon batter into the cake tin, before he stepped forward and set a small wooden box beside her on the table. She looked at him, confused. "What's this?" He opened the lid. Inside lay a strip of blue calico ribbon, a worn slate, and a bundle of chalk tied with twine. "I asked around," he said. "Mrs. Callahan's youngest is outgrowing her letters. She thought you might use these if you still wanted to start something." Elira reached out, touching the slate's edge. "I haven't written anything in years. You don't forget how." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "There's a small room in the barn loft. It's dry. I could clean it out." "I'll help you with the windows," he said. "Let the light in." They didn't say anything else until the cake was in the oven, and the children came thudding down the stairs, barefoot and blinking. Josie had tied a strip of yarn around her wrist, and Jamie had tucked a dried thistle behind his ear, declaring it a crown. Elira crouched and pressed a kiss to Josie's cheek. "Go wash up. Your birthday breakfast isn't fit for a queen unless your hands are clean." Wesley poured cider into tin cups and passed them around. The table was full but quiet, the kind of quiet that holds space instead of tension. Josie grinned around mouthfuls of biscuit, and Jamie whispered something to her that made her giggle. After the meal, they bundled up and walked out to the open field beyond the barn. Wesley had carved a swing from a plank and tied it to the low limb of the cottonwood. Jamie helped push, and Josie laughed so hard she nearly tipped backward. Elira stood to the side, arms crossed against the cold, watching the way Wesley kept one hand near the rope, steadying without taking over. Later, when the children were napping, Elira brought out the cake. It had browned perfectly, the top just cracked and the scent of peach and molasses warm in the air. She set 2 candles in it, one for Josie's new year, and one for the one she'd survived. When Josie woke, Wesley carried her into the kitchen, lifting her like she was made of something rare. They sang, quiet but sure, and Josie clapped her hands before blowing out the flames. Afterward, when the dishes were done and the children settled with their gifts, Jamie with a whittled horse, Josie braiding the ribbon into her doll's hair, Elira stepped out onto the porch. The wind had dropped, and the sky was softening into that pale gold that came before dusk. Wesley joined her, arms folded against the rail. "You did right by them today. They carried the weight with me longer than they should have," she said. "They deserved something soft. They've got it now." She looked out at the field. "I didn't think I'd ever stop bracing for the worst. You don't have to anymore. She turned to him. You sure about that? Only thing I've been sure of in years. She studied him, the lines of his face, the steadiness of his breath. You never asked me to stay. No, he said, but I hoped you would. She stepped closer, her hand slipping into his. I will, she said. Not because I need a roof. Not anymore. But because I want to build something with someone who sees me clear and stays anyway. He didn't answer with words, just leaned down and kissed her, slow and reverent, the way a man does when he knows what it means to be chosen. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat with him by the hearth. Her head rested on his shoulder, her fingers wrapped in his. No promises were spoken. None needed to be. It was all in how they held each other and how they didn't let go. The weeks that followed unfolded with quiet certainty. Wesley cleared out the loft and framed the windows. Elira sanded the floor and hung a curtain across one corner for coats. By early spring, 3 families brought their children for lessons, and Josie stood taller every time she recited her letters. Jamie took to the horses, and Wesley gave him a colt to raise once he'd proven his care. The boy rose early, boots half-laced and hair uncombed, eager to earn what was his. Elira planted a garden near the porch, herbs in neat rows, beans climbing stakes. Wesley built her a bench there, and in the evenings they sat side by side, the land stretching wide and quiet before them. One warm afternoon, Josie tugged Elira's skirt and asked if she would marry Mr. Ryman. Elira crouched beside her and said, "Do you think he'd like that?" Josie nodded solemnly. "He makes good cake." Elira laughed, a sound that came easier now, and kissed the top of her daughter's head. They married that summer, barefoot in the grass behind the barn with the cottonwood leaves whispering overhead. Jamie stood beside Wesley, proud and straight, and Josie scattered wildflowers along the path. No preacher, no crowd. Just a quiet vow spoken with hands clasped and eyes open. Elira wore a dress sewn from the same blue calico as the ribbon Wesley had given her. He wore a clean shirt and the same boots he always had. Afterward, they sat with the children on the porch, lemonade in hand, watching the sun dip low and the fields turn amber. And when the stars came out, Elira leaned into him and whispered, "This time I chose right." He kissed her temple, slow and sure. So did I. The house stood through the seasons. The school grew by 2 more desks, the barn filled with laughter and the smell of hay. And every evening when the work was done, Elira and Wesley sat side by side, their hands always finding each other, their hearts steady as the land beneath them. They had known hardship, yes. But what they built together, trust, warmth, a home full of light, was stronger than what they had lost. And in that quiet strength, they lived the rest of their days together, loved and at peace.